Welcome to the final episode of the first Shogun, Rise of the Genji. It is 2 o'clock in the morning on a cold October night in the year 1185. In the Japanese capital of Heiankyo, all is quiet at the Horikawa mansion. Only one person is awake, a woman by the name of Shizuka, a renowned courtesan famed for her beauty, her intelligence, and her skill as a dancer. The previous evening, Shizuka had taken part in celebrations held in honor of her lord and lover, Yoshitsune, the general who recently led his Genji clan to victory against the Heike and oversaw the Heike's destruction at the great battle of Dan no Ura. But Shizuka, although tired from the night's long entertainment, is restless and cannot sleep. She turns and glances at the man who is sleeping soundly next to her, Yoshitsune, the hero of Dan no Ura, who has passed out, completely drunk. She rises from her futon and looks out across the courtyard. All seems normal, but something disturbs her. She calls for a servant girl and instructs her to check for anything unusual. The girl soon hurries back, alarmed, and informs her that in an avenue outside the mansion she has just seen warriors saddled on horses, fully armed and ready to attack. Shizuka hurries back to Yoshitsune and urges him to rise. Despite her pleas, he refuses to wake up. Exasperated, she throws open the lid of a chest and flings a suit of general's armor on top of him. Yoshitsune wakes with a start. What is it? Enemies outside. Ah, Shizuka, you're our savior. Call on the men. There are no men, my lord. What? Don't you remember? You excused them all at the end of the party last night and told them to return home. Ah! Yoshitsune slaps himself, trying to escape his hangover. Is there no man left to fight? Just Kisanda, my lord. Kisanda. The servant, my lord. Right. Kisanda, yes. All right. Have him come here, quick! A young servant in his early 20s arrives and bows deeply before Yoshitsune. Kisanda! By now, Yoshitsune is splashing water on his face, trying to wake up. Kisanda, we may soon be under attack, and it is down to you and I to defend the mansion. While I arm myself, I need you to hold them off. Can you do that? Kisanda bows even lower. I may be a lowly servant, my lord, but I will do my duty. He grabs a bow and a set of arrows and hastens to the courtyard, where he now sees that men are trying to break down the main entrance. Small in stature, Kisanda is nonetheless an accomplished archer, and he smiles as he strings his bow and drops to one knee. Okay, men, let's see what you've got. 4 men burst through the front gate, and Kisanda lets fly with his arrows. 2 of the men fall dead before they can advance into the courtyard, and the other 2 look stunned as they see their comrades fall. But now Kisanda can see that a more serious threat is emerging through the gate, for the men in the vanguard are standing aside as a hulking warrior strides forward. The man's voice echoes across the courtyard. So, who has been named Yoshitsune's commander for tonight? Identify yourself. I am Tosabo Yoshun. Kisanda remains silent, afraid of being scorned by the enemy because of his low rank. As more men emerge from behind the imposing warrior, Kisanda begins to suspect this may be his last fight. Just then, the attackers see a mounted figure emerge from behind Kisanda, seated on a gold-mounted saddle on a warhorse, dressed in scarlet armor and wearing a helmet with silver studs and a crest in the shape of a deer's antlers. Brandishing a gold-fitted sword, war arrows trimmed with black and white eagle feathers and a rattan bow, he leads his horse into the middle of the courtyard. Several of the attackers start to retreat as they realize who this man is, and their leader, Tosabo, turns in rage. Why do you retreat, men? Yoshitsune is not a god. He is a man, just like any other. And like any man, he can be cut down if a warrior is brave enough. Now charge! Tosabo fires an arrow that catches the protective covering of Kisanda's left arm. Kisanda plucks the arrow out, steps back several paces, and fires another missile. Meanwhile, Yoshitsune drives his mount forward and lays waste to any man who approaches him, slashing left and right with his sword. Having survived the first onslaught, Yoshitsune and Kisanda withdraw, and Yoshitsune notices that Kisanda's body is dripping with blood from the breastplate down. You're wounded? Yes, my lord, the servant says. but a warrior dies on the field of battle. Just then, as they stand ready to withstand a renewed assault, Yoshitsune looks up and notices a huge figure on the rooftop of the eastern gate. Fearing it is one of Tosabo's men preparing a flanking attack, he calls out, "Hey you! Identify yourself!" The man throws aside his monk's robes, revealing his armor, and announces, "I am Musashibo Benkei, eldest son of the Kumano abbot Tazo. I serve Yoshitsune, and I am a man in 1,000. With that, the giant monk leaps easily down from the roof and slaps the young Kisando on the shoulder. "Well done, young man. You've done well." He then turns to Yoshitsune and says, "Sorry I'm late, my lord." The young Kisando smiles as he looks up in amazement at the famous warrior monk who towers on his left, and then at the shining mounted general on his right. As the lowliest of servants, he cannot believe the position he is now in. The three men, side by side, Benkei brandishing his massive naginata blade, Kisanda his quiver of arrows, and Yoshitsune his gleaming sword, prepare to withstand a horde of attackers more than 10 times their number. As they rush at each other, attackers and defenders can hear a bell start to ring from the western gate. It is the Lady Shizuka, who has climbed the bell tower and is calling for reinforcements. Across the roofs of the neighboring houses, she shouts her plea. "Night attackers have invaded Yoshitsune's mansion," she cries. He calls on his retainers, "Anyone who hears this, come to our aid." Hearing the call to arms, Yoshitsune's warriors emerge from their homes and hurry to don armor. A stream of men now races in from every quarter, until some 60 or 70 men have joined the defense at Horikawa Mansion. Finally outnumbered, Tosabo is forced to order a retreat, and he and his men flee northward up the Kamo River, eventually seeking refuge in the temple of Kurama. But there he is pursued remorselessly by Yoshitsune's warriors led by Benkei. Finally, Tosabo is cornered, captured, and brought back to Horikawa Mansion. Benkei drags the captured Tosabo forward and orders him to kneel before Yoshitsune. "We found him seeking refuge at Kurama, my lord, at Sojo-Katani. I believe you're familiar with that area." "Ah, the Valley of the Goblins." Yoshitsune smiles and nods. "Yes, I know it well." He turns to his captive. "How apt that you were captured there. Now, tell me, who sent you? Who ordered you to attack me with no warning, no reason?" The captured Tosabo, despite having Benkei's foot on his neck, just smiles and says nothing. "Was it the retired emperor?" persists Yoshitsune. "Or some remnant of the Heike seeking revenge for Danoura?" Tosabo laughs through his broken teeth and gazes up at Yoshitsune with contempt. "No, it wasn't the Heike or Go Shirakawa who hired me to kill you." Yoshitsune unsheathes his sword and says, "Tell me, and I will grant you a quick and honorable death." Tosabo chuckles. "You really have no idea. I came to assassinate you on the orders of the Lord of Kamakura himself." Yoshitsune hesitates as he holds the sword over Tosabo's neck. "Yes, Yoshitsune. It's your own brother who wants you dead." How did the relationship between the famous two half-brothers, Yoritomo and Yoshitsune, become so sour that one brother paid a hired assassin to kill the other in a nighttime attack? At the end of the first season of this podcast, we saw the moment when the two brothers met for the first time, and it was shortly after Yoritomo's first major victory over the Heike at Fuji River, and was a time when the outlook for both brothers looked bright. Yoshitsune, who was 12 years younger than his brother, swore allegiance to Yoritomo, and there was no reason to doubt that their partnership would last. Yet despite Yoshitsune's loyalty to his brother, and even though he had led the Genji to victory after victory at Ichinotani, Yashima, and most decisively at Danoura, their seemingly indestructible bond had broken. So, what happened? Well, it's really one of the great mysteries of the whole story of the Genpei War. According to the main source, the tale of the Heike, the breakup was largely the result of one man, Kajiwara Kagetoki. And you might recall how in recent episodes Yoshitsune's lieutenant, Kajiwara, had been repeatedly humiliated by Yoshitsune, sometimes over pretty trivial reasons, like the time just before the attack on Yashima when Kajiwara insisted that Yoshitsune fit reverse oars on his boats, something that Yoshitsune dismissed as being defeatist. Then, before Danaora, Kajiwara insisted that he lead the troops rather than risk losing their commander, and again, Yoshitsune just ignored him. All these slights mounted up, and when he got the chance, Kajiwara was ready to pay back in full. After Danaora, he rushed to Kamakura, where he continually bad-mouthed Yoshitsune to his brother until Yoritomo started to suspect that his brother was maybe a threat after all. For according to Kajiwara, Yoshitsune was not only arrogant and ambitious, he was also now completely under the sway of the retired emperor, Go Shirakawa, who Yoritomo couldn't stand. And Yoshitsune was also becoming increasingly popular in the capital, where he was now the hero of the moment. There is simply nobody like Kuro Yoshitsune, the people would say. What did Yoritomo in Kamakura ever do for us? It seems that the naive Yoshitsune, though, had no idea that his brother was increasingly suspicious of his motives, and so it was that he innocently escorted the captive Heike leader, Taira no Munamori, to Kamakura, where Yoshitsune expected to receive at least some thanks from his brother, and hopefully some reward. Instead, he received a cold shoulder. Ironically, Yoritomo, on advice from Kajiwara, was willing to grant an audience to Munamori, the leader of his most hated rival clan, but not to his own brother. Despite the snub, Yoshitsune delivered to Kamakura a famous message that became known as the Koshigoe letter, where he desperately tried to persuade his brother that he offered no threat. But Yoritomo was adamant. He ordered Yoshitsune to return to the capital, where he was told to dispatch Munamori and get rid of the Heike leader's body. Soon after that, Yoritomo ordered the assassin to steal into Yoshitsune's mansion and kill him while he slept. When, as we've seen, Tosabo's assassination attempt failed, Yoritomo sent his father-in-law, Hojo Tokimasa, to the capital with the aim of getting the retired emperor Go Shirakawa to declare Yoshitsune an outlaw. But before Tokimasa could arrive, Yoshitsune fled Heiankyo. He could tell that his time was up. He had just a small band of supporters by now, as few people really wanted to stand against Yoritomo. Among his supporters was Shizuka and, of course, his stalwart bodyguard, Benkei. At first, Yoshitsune tried to reach the island of Shikoku, where he had defeated the Heike recently at Yashima, but their boats soon got caught in an almighty storm, which, legend has it, was brought on by the spirits of the Heike dead, intent on wreaking vengeance on the general who had destroyed their fleet at Danaora. After Benkei had prayed for divine aid, the storm abated, but by that time the boats had been blown completely off course and ended up landing in an area near modern-day Osaka. And so, from there, Yoshitsune changed plan and decided to set out on a long journey to the east, to the place where he had found refuge many years ago as a teenager, the fabled City of Gold, Hiraizumi. By now it was midwinter and the snows were becoming thick. As Yoshitsune's band of followers crossed the mountains of Yoshino, he became separated from his lover, the Lady Shizuka, who was forced to return to the capital. Eventually, after months of being pursued through the length of Honshu and experiencing adventures and close shaves that would become the basis for no plays, stories, and manga across the years, Yoshitsune finally reached Hiraizumi, the famous City of Gold in the north of Japan's main island of Honshu. It was there that he was reunited with his old mentor, Fujiwara Hidehira. Now, during the Genpei War, Hidehira had remained neutral and had retained his powerful position in the north, and because of that, he was one of the few people who potentially still offered a threat to Yoritomo in Kamakura. For a while, Yoshitsune received the shelter he had sought, but unfortunately his old mentor Hidehira was now in his mid-60s and was not well. Before he died in 1187, Hidehira implored his sons Kunihira and Yasuhira to protect Yoshitsune, no matter what inducements and threats Yoritomo might offer them. No sooner had the old man passed away, though, the sons began squabbling over what to do with their illustrious guest. And unfortunately for Yoshitsune, the son who prevailed was Yasuhira, who, under pressure from Yoritomo, caved in and ordered an attack on Yoshitsune's residence on June 15th, 1189. What happened on that final night, not surprisingly, has become the stuff of legend. Yoshitsune's defenders put up a courageous defense despite overwhelming odds, and the warrior who put up the stoutest defense was, of course, Yoshitsune's trusty bodyguard, Benkei. Determined to give his commander time to end his life honorably, it is said that Benkei stood on a bridge and taunted Yasuhira's troops to cross it, basically telling them, "You shall not pass." One after the other, the attacking warriors tried to cross the bridge, but each one was cut down by Benkei, who wielded his massive naginata blade like a crazed demon. Eventually the Fujiwara realized hand-to-hand combat was futile, so they retreated and began to fire a rain of arrows on the defiant monk. After a devastating fusillade, they were astonished to see that Benkei was still standing, despite the fact that he was covered in arrows and by now apparently looked like a porcupine. Gingerly, one of the men approached Benkei to get a closer look, and it was then that they realized that Benkei was in fact dead, and had been for several minutes. But, miraculously, was still standing, leaning on his long naginata. Benkei's heroic resistance, which came to be known as the standing death of Benkei, gave his commander the time he needed. By the time Yasuhira's troops entered Yoshitsune's house, they found that he had killed himself by seppuku. Some days later, Kajiwara Kagetoki brought to Yoritomo a parcel at his residence at Kamakura. Inside, Yoritomo discovered the decapitated head of his famous half-brother, preserved in a container of sake. A sad but suitably dramatic and memorable end to the man who was perhaps Japan's greatest and certainly its most legendary general. No one will ever really know whether Yoshitsune was a genuine threat to his brother, or whether the feud was really down to Yoritomo's suspicious nature, which by now was becoming more like paranoia, or whether it was really down to Kajiwara's revenge on the commander who had humiliated him. But in any case, the battle of the brothers was over, and having disposed of Yoshitsune, Yoritomo could now turn his attention to wiping out any other resistance to his power. So what happened to the northern Fujiwara after they had acquiesced to Yoritomo's demands? Well, unfortunately for them, that wasn't enough to appease Yoritomo. The Genji leader was skeptical that the Fujiwara clan would remain his ally, and he also looked with envy at the gold mines that the Fujiwara held in the north. And so, in September 1189, just a month after Yoshitsune's death, Yoritomo set out from Kamakura with, according to one source, more than 280,000 horsemen, a massive army drawn from more than 60 provinces across Japan, even from Kyushu in the south, all brought together to aid Yoritomo in his quest to take the north of Japan. Against such a force, the Fujiwara didn't stand a chance, and in a series of clashes known as the Battle of Oshu, Yoritomo brought them to their knees. Now he had their northern lands, Yoritomo essentially had control of the whole of Japan. The Heike, meanwhile, were pretty much destroyed as a fighting force, but that was not enough for Yoritomo. He was determined to wipe out every last remnant of the Heike so that they could never again threaten his own family. The Heike's former head, Taira no Kiyomori, had died some years earlier, and of his sons, the three most prominent were Munamori, Tomomori, and Shigehira. Tomomori had met his end at the climax of the Battle of Danoura, and Munamori, as we have seen, has just been executed by Yoshitsune under Yoritomo's orders. So that left just Shigehira, the man who had destroyed the famous Buddhist temples at Nara and who had been taken captive at Ichinotani. Initially, Yoritomo had treated him well and provided him with sanctuary, but in the end he decided he could no longer take the risk. He ordered Shigehira to be handed over to the monks of Nara, who happily dispatched him with an axe. But the slaughter did not stop there. One by one, the last Heike relatives and remaining samurai were tracked down and killed, even young children like Rokudai, the son of Kiyomori's grandson, Koremori. And it wasn't just the Heike family members who were taken out. Nearly all of the samurai who had survived the final battles were hunted down. One of the last was a renowned fighter, Eiju no Moritsuge, who, like in a scene from The Godfather, was eventually cornered and captured in his bathtub and executed by Yoritomo. But there is one incident that perhaps best encapsulates just how ruthless and how cunning Yoritomo could be at this stage in his life. Although more than 2.5 decades had passed since the death of his father, Yoshitomo, he still longed to avenge his father's murder. The two men who had betrayed and killed his father were two of Yoshitomo's former retainers, Osada no Tadamune and his son, Kagemune, who had betrayed and murdered the Genji Lord at the end of the Heiji Rebellion back in 1160, an event we covered way back near the start of Season 1 of this podcast series in the episode The Red and the White. During the recent Genpei War, the Osadas had sided not with the Heike but with the Genji, and they had ridden to Kamakura where, either out of contrition or fear, they had begged Yoritomo for forgiveness for their past crimes. Yoritomo, surprisingly perhaps, welcomed them and assigned them to a force he was sending to the capital. The Osadas continued to support Yoritomo's cause throughout the war, fighting beside the Genji at battles like Uji Bridge and Ichinotani. Yoritomo apparently took great interest in their welfare and frequently asked about them, and was pleased when they both returned to Kamakura at the end of the war. At this point, Yoritomo informed the Osadas that he had one more assignment for them. Accompanied by several of Yoritomo's retainers, the two Osadas were sent on an expedition to what is now Aichi province. The Osadas assumed they were still in Yoritomo's good graces, so went along willingly, apparently suspecting nothing unusual. But just when they were feeling quite safe, Yoritomo's retainers turned on them, took them captive, and dragged them to the place where the late Yoshitomo was buried. There, the two Osadas were beaten up and attached with huge nails to two wooden boards laid before Lord Yoshitomo's grave. Thus, the two men were crucified within sight of the tomb of the man they had betrayed long ago. As the saying goes, revenge is a dish best served cold, and after waiting 25 years, Yoritomo's dish was very cold indeed. Having wiped out every threat to his authority, it's easy to imagine Yoritomo now as like a brooding Al Pacino at the end of the second Godfather film, sitting alone and paranoid, having eliminated everyone who betrayed or threatened him, even his own brother. And yes, Yoritomo was ruthless with anyone who put up resistance or who might even have thoughts of challenging him. But there was another side to him, because Yoritomo was, usually at least, unwavering in his loyalty to the people who swore him allegiance, even people who previously had supported other clans. And it was due to his reputation as a steadfast and reliable lord and protector that he was able to achieve the backing of so many other families across Japan. To maintain his influence over this vast area, though, he needed a system of control. In the east, around Kamakura, he had already established a system known as the Samurai Dokoro, where leading families would offer him allegiance in return for his protection. He now extended that feudal system across the whole nation, with constables or wardens, known as shugo, appointed to each province, and stewards or jito in charge of each estate. That way he could keep order and peace and collect taxes, the country's leading samurai and administrators all owing allegiance to him, not the imperial court. What it meant was that now Kamakura, not the old capital of Heiankyo, was in control of the nation. By 1190, though, Yoritomo's rise to power was still not yet complete. He was military leader and chief warden, but the imperial court, under the influence of the elderly retired emperor Go-Shirakawa, still had not officially bestowed upon him the title he demanded. Then, in April 1192, Go-Shirakawa finally breathed his last. The retired emperor, who had shifted allegiances so many times over the last 20 years and had survived every twist and turn of the Genpei War, had finally met a rival he could not beat: old age. 4 months later, Yoritomo was granted the official title he had craved. The young emperor Go-Toba awarded him the permanent position of Sei Tai Shogun, making him undisputed ruler and the most powerful man in the country. It marked the start of a new style of government, the Kamakura Shogunate, or Bakufu, a military government that for the first time was separate from the imperial court. Yoritomo, supported by his samurai vassals, was now overall ruler of Japan, and it was a role he could expect to pass on to his heirs, because, again for the first time, the title of shogun would be hereditary. Yoritomo would live for another 7 years, during which time he would see his son Yorie grow to young manhood. Also, in the year that he became shogun, Yoritomo's wife Masako gave birth to a second son, who would later be known as Sanetomo. For now, with his legacy apparently secured and his position unassailable, the future of the Genji seemed very bright. In 1199, Yoritomo essentially retired and was ordained as a Buddhist monk. He did not have long to enjoy his retirement, however, for just 2 days later, as he was riding back to his residence, he fell from his horse and died soon after from his injuries. The cause of his fall was never confirmed, but according to one version of events, as he was riding, there suddenly rose up before him the ghost of his half-brother Yoshitsune, and in his alarm, Yoritomo recoiled and fell from his saddle. Well, if true, it is perhaps fitting that it was the face of Yoshitsune, the brother he had loved and betrayed, that was the last thing that the first shogun would ever see. Despite leaving 2 surviving sons, the first shogun's legacy would not turn out as he had expected. After his father's death, the 17-year-old Yorie became the new shogun of Japan, but without his father's authority, the government soon split into different factions, all competing to influence the young and impressionable young shogun. One of the samurai who fell foul of the young shogun was Yoshitsune's old nemesis, Kajiwara Kagetoki, who, it seems, just couldn't stop making trouble and creating enemies. So Yorie had him hunted down and killed, along with Kagetoki's son Kagesue, the young warrior who years ago had competed against Sasaki Takatsuna in the famous horse race at Uji Bridge. As for Sasaki Takatsuna himself, he apparently lived to quite an old age, after first retiring as a priest at Mount Koya. And, a full disclosure at this point, the Sasaki family are actually distant ancestors of my own wife's family, who is Japanese, and that's one more reason why I've become so interested in this whole story. Okay, well, back to the new shogun. Well, what happened next was a weird turn of events that Yoritomo could not have expected, for it turned out to be the Hojo clan, the family of his wife Masako, who became the most powerful family in the land. The young Yorie couldn't command the same authority his father had, and so eventually the Hojo clan turned against him, even though he was Masako's own son, and had him arrested and eventually assassinated. The second shogun was then replaced by the Hojo clan's favorite, Yorie's brother, Yoritomo Masako's second son, Sanetomo. But in turn, his rule was also cut short. On a snowy evening in February 1219, Sanetomo, the third shogun, was coming down the steps of Kamakura's Surigaoka shrine when a man stepped out and shouted, "With this, I avenge my father!" He slashed with his sword and cut down the young shogun, blood bleeding into the snow. The assassin, it turned out, was the son of his murdered brother, Yorie. For his act of defiance, the assassin was also beheaded, and thus, on one bloody evening, the rule of the Seiwa Genji's bloodline came to an abrupt end. Now, if you're confused at this point, don't worry, because this is one of the strangest periods in Japanese history where every relative seemed to be conspiring against all their other family members. Nevertheless, the position of shogun, miraculously, continued to be appointed to men who were related somehow to Yoritomo. And so the position of shogun continued to belong to the Genji line. But the real power now lay in the hand of the regent, and the regent was always a member of Masako's line. Masako herself would become known as the Nun Shogun and would live to the age of 68. She is regarded today as one of the most influential women in Japan's history. And so, for the next few generations, it was the family of Yoritomo's wife, Masako, that essentially would rule Japan, not the Minamoto shoguns that they controlled. We can only imagine how Yoritomo might have thought about that, but he would probably be happier to learn that his new form of government, a shogunate led by samurai, would continue in various forms for a very, very long time. For the extended Minamoto line would in fact continue to rule Japan for more than 6 centuries. There would be other shogunates, notably the Ashikaga shogunate and the Tokugawa shogunate, which formed the basis for James Clavell's novel Shogun. But that basic form of samurai government would last until 1868, when the rule of Japan finally passed back to the emperor in what was known as the Meiji Restoration. So only at that time did the samurai rule established by Yoritomo in 1192 finally come to its end. When he first began his rebellion against the Heike, when he had just 300 men or so, it's hard to imagine that Yoritomo could have envisaged that he would become not only the nation's leader, but also form a government that would last for 6 centuries. And at that time, his goal was most likely just to restore at least some kind of honor to his family, which had been shattered after the Heiji rebellion and his own exile. And for those of you who have been listening to the whole series of podcasts, and thank you if you have, you may remember that in the very first episode of the first season, we saw how Yoritomo lost possession of a valued family heirloom. And it was that moment that really represented the Genji's loss to the Heike. It was the ancient sword, Higekiri, forged in the distant past and a symbol of the Genji clan's strength. After Yoritomo was captured and his father murdered, the sword was taken possession by their most hated rival, the lord of the Heike, Taira no Kiyomori. Yoritomo perhaps had assumed it had been lost forever, but according to the chronicle of the tale of the Heiji, the legendary sword eventually found a way to return to its rightful owners. In the year 1190, Yoritomo paid a visit to Heiankyo. It was the first time he had been to the capital since his exile 30 years earlier. On his arrival, he went to call on the retired emperor, Go Shirakawa. On seeing Yoritomo, the old emperor apparently recalled with great emotion the long-ago days when Yoritomo had lived in Heiankyo as a youth, when, for a time, he had actually been in service at the palace. Go Shirakawa then called for a special item to be brought to them, something that had been recovered from the Heike's possessions at Rokuhara. The item was placed before Yoritomo in a brocade bag. "I gather that this sword is a great Genji treasure," the retired emperor said. "Kiyomori apparently treated it as a protective talisman while he had it in his possession, and he never allowed it out of his residence. No doubt it will mean a great deal to you, too, since your house so values it." With that, the old emperor presented to Yoritomo the great sword, Higekiri, the mightiest of weapons, the blade that had once cut down a demon at Rashomon Gate, and which had been passed down through the Genji line for generations. Now, after years of struggle, the cycle was complete. The Heike had fallen, the Genji had risen. There was a new order in Japan with the Shogun, not the emperor, at its head. It was now the time of the samurai.